Hello and welcome to this Arise News special program on the US election. I'm Sumner Sambo. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the US presidential election is too close to call after President Donald Trump and Joe Biden ran neck and neck in tight races. The final result of the election is unlikely to be known for many hours and even days. As voters await the election result, questions have been raised about the possibility of a tie. As votes are still being counted, President Trump vows to take election to Supreme Court as his challenger, Joe Biden, tells his supporters to keep the faith. For now, neither candidate has secured the 270 Electoral College votes needed to claim victory. Could this election end in a tie? And if it does, what happens next? We'll speak to a Republican, a Democrat, and our special correspondent. Coming up. America is on the knife edge as the presidential election results show that the two candidates are neck and neck, with the outcome still unclear in key states. President Trump has once again confounded pollsters by winning states he was expected to struggle in, including Florida and Texas. We also hear he's leading in Pennsylvania, but the Democrat challenger has taken the state of Arizona from the president in what is a significant swing. He also leads in Michigan and Wisconsin. But the battle for the White House will be settled in the key Midwestern swing states, where many votes are still to be counted and the results are currently too close to call. President Trump is vowing to ask the Supreme Court to weigh in on the inconclusive election.
12 votes and we have 60% left. We won states and all of a sudden, I said, what happened to the election? It's off. And we have all these announcers saying, what happened? And then they said, oh, because you know what happened? They knew they couldn't win. So they said, let's go to court. And did I predict this, Newt? Did I say this? I've been saying this from the day I heard they were going to send out tens of millions of ballots. I said exactly, because either they were going to win, or if they didn't win, they'll take us to court. So Florida was a tremendous victory, 377,000. Texas, as we said. Ohio, think of this. Ohio, a tremendous state, a big state. I love Ohio. We won by 8.1%, 461,000. Think of it. Almost 500,000 votes. North Carolina, big victory with North Carolina. And so we won there. We lead by 76,000 votes with almost nothing left. And all of a sudden, everything just stopped. This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the US Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our support. I want to thank all of the people that worked with us.
Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined via Cisco WebEx by Greg Swenson, a partner at Brigg McAdam. an Africa-focused investment bank. He's also a Republican strategist. Good to have you with us. So let's just talk about these allegations by Donald Trump that the election seems to have been stolen from him. What's your view about this?
Well, I think we expected that whichever party was losing, there would be some accusation that the other party stole the election. That's just part of electoral politics. It's sometimes not constructive, but it's just part of the game where, and this started back in terms of recent history, post-war history in 2000, when there was disputed ballots in Florida and it ended up going to the Supreme Court. So there is some precedent here. I'm not sure that the president did himself a favor with the talk. And I think like a lot of moments with President Trump, people end up focusing more on his comments, which weren't particularly clear, as opposed to, commenting on what he actually did or what he what he accomplished. I thought, his reference to winning in Florida was a positive thing. And, perhaps he should have stuck with some of those victories, the small victories that he had so far in the election. But I think I'm not sure I would focus too much on his comments. He's probably ahead of the game a little bit, and he's thinking ahead. But on the other hand, I think the best thing to do is let the process work itself out in the next few days and figure out what the status is. I know there's great potential for problems in Pennsylvania because of some of the changes in the way that they run the election, and I was hoping that the president would not need Pennsylvania, because that's the one that's going to take the longest because of the particular process they have in place there. I was hoping if he won, Wisconsin and Michigan, that it would make Pennsylvania somewhat irrelevant, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
We've had this issue of Florida being said almost everywhere, and you would agree with me that election in 2000 between Al Gore and former President Bush was taken to the Supreme Court, and eventually the Supreme Court halted the counting of votes in Florida. Do we hope to see a repeat of this, considering that Trump is asking that the mail-in ballots should not be allowed, and we have over 400 court cases, both at the higher and lower courts in the U.S. on, why these mail-in ballots should not be allowed?
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast between Florida and Pennsylvania, because looking back at 2000, Florida wasn't quite prepared to run a free and fair election because they had some issues. Remember the old dimpled chads. So there were some issues with the way they actually collected the in-person voting. What's interesting about Florida, partly because of the debacle in 2000, they've really ramped up their electoral processes. And so they were very well prepared for this election. You'll notice Florida was one of the first states to declare and finish tabulating their votes. So it just shows you that if there's proper preparation, that these elections can be run quite freely and fairly, and that voter ensuring that there's a good outcome, or ensuring that there's a free and fair election, is important. And Florida did a really great job of that. There's really no disputes on either side about the integrity of the electoral process there. So that's what's important. The problem is in Pennsylvania, if we fast forward 20 years, they are not quite prepared for this deluge of mail-in votes. And I think it's important to understand that, these aren't absentee voting like those of us who are expats and living abroad. We vote in a traditional, it's a traditional absentee ballot where you have to apply for the ballot. They match your signature, they check your address. So there's really some documentation that ensures voter integrity. But what happened this time is they just did mass mail-in ballot distribution, which really opens up, not only does it open up the opportunity for fraud, but just the opportunity for mistakes. Now, states that have run mail-in voting for years, like states in the West, Washington, Oregon, and Utah, for example, they have a very deliberate process to ensure voter integrity. They've been doing this for years, so they were well prepared for the increase in mail-in voting because they were used to it. but the states in the upper Midwest were not prepared for it, and that's the problem with Pennsylvania. And then, of course, you had the 11th hour change to the electoral process there that was dictated by the Pennsylvania court rather than the legislature. And in the U.S. Constitution, it ensures that the legislatures of the states determine the electoral process. And that's not what happened in Pennsylvania. So that's just added a layer of confusion. But surely some of these states were just not prepared for the massive amount of mail-in votes that we're experiencing here. Florida was prepared. In fact, they started counting ballots weeks ago so that you wouldn't end up having some mad rush at the end. And what's important for voter integrity is that you have a limit on when mail-in ballots or absentee ballots can be considered. And so the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania decided to extend the deadline from November 3rd to November 6th. So it just creates an opportunity for mistakes and potential fraud. And I think that's the problem with some of these states that are now, we're not able to count properly the votes in time for election day. And therefore, it's definitely raising questions about the voter process or the voter integrity. And that's what's important here.
All right, Greg, talk to us about what John Bolton just said not quite long ago, that it's a disgrace for a serving United States president to actually discredit and disparage this electoral process, considering that even some of the votes that are still outstanding will be to his credit at the end of the day. How does this project the U.S. before the international community?
Well, yeah, no, it's a good question, Sumner, a really good question. And I think the president is known for being disruptive and for being unfiltered. That's part of his nature. It's one of the reasons he was elected in 2016. Because listen, we all miss the sort of well-mannered politics of the old days. When George Bush went through the process in Florida in 2000, he was probably a little bit more filtered and polite in his discussions. But he still had a team of lawyers, and so did the Democrats. And Al Gore's lawyer, David Blasey, he actually said in his book that he quite deliberately only attempted to get the ballots considered in the precincts where he knew Al Gore would get the most votes. So, that's just electoral politics. It's a little bit dirty sometimes. It's competitive. But, so Al Gore, is definitely guilty of that, or at least his lawyer was. In 2000, what you see is from the president, instead of doing it clandestinely or under the radar with his lawyers, he's a little bit more upfront about it. And, that's distasteful or unseemly to some. But on the other hand, that's one of the unique characteristics of the president that appeals to some of the people that vote for him.
Before we go on a very quick break, I just want you to, in 30 seconds, just tell me if you think Donald Trump would actually agree if he loses this election.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And he clarified that last week, and so did his press secretary. What he's trying to ensure is just voter integrity, to make sure that the elections were fair and there's no opportunity to add ballots because it's a tight race or because the other team is losing. And that's all he's trying to ensure. So if it's a free and fair election and it's determined by the states that, Vice President Biden actually won freely and fairly, then absolutely the president would be happy to do that.
I'd like to thank you, Greg Swanson, a Republican strategist who has just been speaking with us on all of this. Thanks a lot for your very good analysis. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we'll speak to a Democrat about the tense wait for the U.S. presidential election, which is too close to call. Stay with us. Welcome back to this Arise special program. I'm Sumner Sambo, and we're focusing on the American elections and its outcome. Millions of legally cast votes are being counted in elections offices around the United States as the presidential race between President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden comes down to a handful of battleground states. With more than 90% of the votes counted in Wisconsin, Biden holds a narrow lead over Trump in that state of just more than 20,000 votes, with all of Milwaukee's vote counted. However, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden says he is confident that he will win the U.S. presidential election, but is cautioning his supporters to wait until every vote is counted.
Good evening. Your patience is commendable. We knew this was going to go long, but who knew we were going to go into maybe tomorrow morning, maybe even longer. But look, we feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good. We're feeling good about where we are. We believe one of the nets has suggested we've already won Arizona, but we're confident about Arizona. That's a turnaround. We also just called it for Minnesota, and we're still in the game in Georgia, although that's not one we expected. And we're feeling real good about Wisconsin and Michigan. And by the way, it's going to take time to count the votes. We're going to win Pennsylvania. I've been talking to folks in Philly, Allegheny County, Scranton, and they're really encouraged by the turnout and what they see. Look, you know, we could know the results as early as tomorrow morning, but it may take a little longer. As I've said all along, it's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome. And I want to thank every one of you who came out and voted in this election. And by the way, Chris Coons and the Democrats, congratulations here in Delaware.
And for more insight on this, I'm now being joined via Cisco WebEx by John Lindsay, a member of the Democrats abroad. Good to have you, John. And do you feel good also, just like Joe Biden?
Yeah, we're confident that we're going to win. The numbers of returns that are coming back in Wisconsin and Michigan look really good for us, as well as Nevada, and clearly our win in Arizona being quite a large deal. I think it's also important to note that a Republican stronghold of Georgia is currently still uncalled, and that speaks to the fact that we are playing very well in a broad coalition of voters. And we're very much looking forward to the next couple of days as every vote that has been legally cast gets counted.
All right, John, talk to us about the win in Arizona. Were you expecting Biden to take that state, and how has that boosted the morale of the Democrats after taking that key state?
Well, for context, a Democrat hasn't carried Arizona since 1996. And for us, we see it as an opportunity not only to expand the map in places like Maricopa County in Arizona, but also an opportunity for us to broaden our coalition with Latino voters and really bring in that group of disenfranchised suburban voters who were with us in 2018 and definitely showed up for the vice president in Arizona in 2020. And I think it's not only is a great win for us now, but it's also a canary in the coal mine for us for places moving forward into the future.
Americans have been asked by Joe Biden to be patient while the mail-in ballots are being counted. How much patience do Americans actually need more, considering that it will take a longer period of time before these mail-in ballots are counted, and considering that there are over 400 cases in several courts on, the legality of the mail-in ballots? And do we foresee, what happened in 2000 actually happening, where Al Gore and George Bush had to be tied, and eventually the Supreme Court had to come in?
No, we do not see a Bush v. Gore situation happening this time around. And it's really important to emphasize why. First, we have been successfully voting by mail since 1863, since the Civil War. The American vote by mail system is, despite what your previous guest might suggest, is not riddled with fraud. A great example being the Heritage Foundation did a study of when Colorado moved to be a vote by mail state, and found not 6%, but 6 instances of potentially fraudulent ballots in a state of several million people. This is a completely safe and fair way to vote. And yes, we obviously are disheartened by the fact that Republicans have successfully attacked the efficacy of the vote in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which, by the way, is the reason why Pennsylvania needs to wait to count their mail-in ballots. But the reality is that we know that those mail-in ballots are from people who are worried about COVID, who are worried about the way that the president has handled this pandemic. And so we're confident that as those legally cast mail-in ballots are counted, they're going to break for us. And it's going to be a good win, not only for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but for the American people, and to head us in a new direction.
Now let's flip the cards and think of the possibility, for example, of Joe Biden losing Pennsylvania. What will that happen, and how will that affect the overall tally of Joe Biden at the moment, considering that what he has right now is a narrow lead?
So there's a lot of focus on Pennsylvania, in part because of the issues with the litigation around mail-in ballots. But the reality is that the Biden campaign has many more pathways than the president does to the number of 270. If Biden holds Nevada, wins Wisconsin, and wins Michigan, and the results in Maine, where we pick up the statewide vote hold, that's 270. That's it. That's the ball game. Doesn't matter if we don't win North Carolina. Doesn't matter if we don't win Pennsylvania. Doesn't matter if we don't win Georgia. 270 has been hit. So the reality is that for the president, Pennsylvania is very fundamentally important for him to stay in the game. But we are at a point where we have a lot more options available to us on the Democratic side. And that's a credit to our organizing work. It's a credit to building a broad coalition, and it's also a credit to the poll workers that have done an incredible job of administering this election across the country.
Now, John, if Biden actually wins this election, what kind of president do you think he will be, and how will the international community view the United States, afresh, considering what Trump has actually been doing and saying, and then, removing the U.S. from certain international organizations and all of that? What sort of president do you anticipate Joe Biden to be if he eventually emerges winner?
Well, I think Joe Biden will be a unifying figure for the United States, and I think he will be a thoughtful and a compassionate leader in the world. I mean, this is the same Joe Biden that served as the head of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate and actively met with world leaders for 25, 30 years. This is the same Joe Biden that was President Obama's right-hand man on foreign policy and was out there doing everything he can to engage the world. Joe Biden will be an effective and meaningful leader for the United States. And will not only unify the country and bring us all back together again, but will re-engage America in our global community.
In 30 seconds before we go, what if Biden loses? What do you think will happen to the Democrats?
I mean, I think that's not going to happen. The pathways just simply don't exist for the president in the ways that they do for the vice president. The vice president is going to win this election. He is going to unify the country, and he's with help from our majority in the House, is going to lead us into the next decade.
All right, thanks a lot, John. John Lindsay, they're being very optimistic that Joe Biden is going to continue with his lead and will eventually be announced winner of the U.S. election. You're watching the Arise special and plenty more we've got ahead, so just stay with us because we have a chain of analysts, on Arise News that will be coming to speak, to the figures that we're receiving from all states and actually bring out the news from all that, is happening in the U.S. at the moment. So we'll just go on this short break.
Too late now.
A very warm welcome again to this Arise News special program on the U.S. election and its outcome. I'm Sumner Sambo. Meanwhile, former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has denounced as a disgrace U.S. President Donald Trump's premature claim that he had won re-election and his vow to ask the Supreme Court to stop the vote.
Few hours ago where he basically said that he was winning, had won, but now the election would be stolen from him, were some of the most irresponsible comments that a president of the United States has ever made. We don't know what the outcome will be. It's entirely possible Trump could win, but he has cast doubt on the integrity of the entire electoral process purely for his own personal advantage. It's a disgrace. For 31 days in Florida, we looked very hard for fraud. In 2000, there was a lot of incompetence, but there wasn't any fraud. So if they can find fraud here, they're entitled to prove it. And if they don't have it, really they should refrain from making claims for which they have no evidence. The Electoral College, which actually makes a decision, by law will meet on December the 14th. So if a state's not done with its count, then it simply won't cast its Electoral College votes. There's not a state governor in this country that wants that embarrassment. So one way or another, I think everybody understands that although it may take longer this year because of coronavirus and other complications, you get to a decision. This shows, I think, why he's not fit to be president of the United States. He has a responsibility as president, notwithstanding he's also a candidate, to give confidence to the people that the integrity of their votes will be assured. And he's casting doubt on integrity of votes, including votes that will be cast for him that haven't even been counted yet. So if he doesn't get results fairly soon, unless his team can keep him off the Twitter feed and that sort of thing, I think we're going to hear more of this for weeks.
And to bring us up to speed with the figures, I'm joined now in the studio by our special correspondent, Carl Bostic. Good to have you, Carl.
Afternoon, Sumner.
Just before we go into the figures, you can hear Trump's former national security advisor casting aspersions on him for that comment that he actually made on his victory, which we all know it's not announced formally. Yeah. Why do you think that is happening, especially from a member of his former team?
Well, Sumner, what John Bolton is saying is not surprising because this happens every year. What I'm referring to is this. When it comes to voting and when it comes to counting votes, each state has its own rules about handling the counting of votes. What's happened already, what we do know for certain is this. The polls have closed, no more votes are being cast, and now the very tedious process of counting each vote is underway. What's happened, Sumner, this year is this. Is that it's been amplified by this pandemic crisis. That's why it's a pandemic election. As you know, we have a majority of Americans for the first time, nearly 100 million casting their votes, either early votes, either by mail-in ballot or by standing in line for early voting. That's unprecedented, and not every state is quite frankly geared up to deal with the mail-in ballots, for example. For example, Pennsylvania Secretary of State said they had 10 times as many mail-in ballots than ever before, 2.5 million mail-in ballots compared to 2016. So that's why we are
through. Initially, we had anticipated that Joe Biden will be having 238, but what we have right now is 227 because counting is still on in Arizona.
Correct.
Take us through that.
Let me just explain what's at stake right now, because basically he wants the counting stopped, even though the votes have already been cast. So for example, and you can see the percentages of states that have been reported. So for example, in Wisconsin, 97% have been reported already, with Biden with a 0.7 percentage point lead. Michigan, Biden with a 0.2% lead, again with 90% reported counted. Pennsylvania, Trump actually has a sizable lead of 10 points, but that's only with 76% counted. And the reason why this is so dynamic, because this reportable figure, 76%, it does not reflect the big cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which are overwhelmingly Democrat, and that would change it entirely. Those details like that. In Arizona, as we mentioned, Biden is up by 3.4%. Some people have already given Arizona to Biden with its 11 electoral votes. That's why some say it's 238. And then finally, Nevada with 86% reported, Biden is leading by 0.7%. And again, to put things in more context about what's really at stake with the votes that need to be counted, Sumner, in Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, you've got more than 400,000 votes waiting to be counted just in Philadelphia alone. That would change that outcome dramatically. In Michigan, you've got more than 500,000 votes still waiting to be counted. And again, they're coming from the biggest city, Detroit, which is heavily Democrat. And similarly, in Arizona, you have 100,000 votes outstanding, which would not really change the balance in favor of Biden. Those are the states that he wants to have the counting stop. If we can
and how feasible is that? Is there a precedent to that when an election is ongoing and votes have been cast, and then just when counting is going on,
well,
some of the states will just be stopped from
No,
counting?
Not at all, John. I mean, Sumner, because
so it's unprecedented.
Well, let me just explain this to you. As John Bolton said, each state has its own set of rules about how to handle. If we can go back to the slide of the maps, please. Each state has its own set of rules about how to handle the counting of votes. So, in other words, in Pennsylvania, for example, state officials have until November 11th, no matter what, to count all votes. In Florida, which has already been cast in the win column for Donald Trump, Florida has 2 weeks. And in Michigan, they have almost 3 weeks to finalize their tally, no ifs, ands, or buts. But if we now look at this list of states in terms of what's possible for Joe Biden, he's actually in pretty good shape to get to 270. What I'm suggesting is that with Arizona, he's up in Arizona, he's up in Michigan, he's up in Nevada, he's up in Wisconsin. If you add those up, Sumner, that gets him squarely to 270, enough to win.
And the figures in Pennsylvania will actually be disputed because a lot of persons are actually saying that it may still go to Trump. It may still go to Trump.
Well,
so Biden should be careful not to be, too enthusiastic about getting the 20 electoral college votes there.
The only thing he should be enthusiastic about is making sure all the votes are counted. If all the votes are counted in these states,
including mail-in ballots.
Yes, all the votes. So the point I'm making is this, Sumner. If all the votes are counted in these states, he can get to 270 even without Pennsylvania. That would make life a whole lot easier for his campaign and probably for supporters and for the country itself. But then, so you need to keep that in mind, that they do have a path to victory without Pennsylvania being counted, as long as his remaining votes can be counted, if we can go back to that big map. But what you're also talking about is really important, because what's happened as a result of this, if it's a nightmare scenario, it's a nightmare scenario because the one thing that the Biden campaign wanted was to win enough states with enough votes. For example, Texas, which was very close.
I mean, Texas, Florida,
Ohio was close.
Ohio, and I'm surprised,
with
the turnout.
They were hoping to score a knockout against Donald Trump. In other words, a national repudiation of what President Donald Trump stood for. Instead, if Joe Biden wins, he barely wins. He will not have a mandate. If anything, this split in votes, it shows how divided the country really is today, Sumner, how polarized it is.
Okay, I don't know if you heard what Bernie Sanders had said, that even after some of the majority counting of states had been achieved, there may likely be a scenario whereby when the mail-in ballots are being counted later on, some of those key leads of maybe 1 point or maybe 2 points may be edged up later on. And so there may be a challenge where Donald Trump will want to say, okay, this is what I told you guys. You see, when the mail-in ballots are being added, I'm being defeated in some of these states. What can you say about that?
Well, two things. Number one, as I just mentioned a moment ago, that's why each state has its own rules for a deadline by which all ballots are counted. And when I say counted, I also mean verified and validated. But once you get to that point, that doesn't mean that it can't be challenged or contested, which is how it could go to court, which is how it could, let's say, even go to the Supreme Court. That's what they want to avoid. And that's why these next few days are just so uncertain and actually just placing the country in much, much more turmoil. The benefit of maybe having a path to 270 without worrying about Pennsylvania, that's maybe one less potential headache, because Pennsylvania just has so many problems with so many votes outstanding and that could be contested and disputed, especially if it goes to Trump.
Now, let's talk about the scenario that some persons across the world are already anticipating. We may be having a Gore and Bush kind of scenario like it happened in Florida in 2000. Where, for example, the issues of the ballots were in contest and
the Chads.
They had to go to the Supreme Court, and eventually voting was stopped. While the Democrats wanted the voting to continue, the Supreme Court said no, the voting should be stopped, and eventually George Bush was announced as winner. And in that election, we had George Bush having 271 electoral college votes and Al Gore 266. Do you foresee something like a very close run-up between these two guys? On this issue?
Very simply, there are two takeaways from this, Sumner. People do see parallels with 2000, as you just suggested, but it's much, much more complicated and much, much worse because it's not about just one state, Florida in this case. You're talking about multiple states. You're talking about Pennsylvania, you're talking about Michigan, you're talking about Wisconsin, you're talking about Arizona, you're talking about Nevada, even Georgia. All of those states, in the eyes of the Trump campaign and the Republican committee, all of those states are fair game when it comes to dispute, especially if the outcome is going to be for a Biden win. And if you look at what Joe Biden was saying last night, he wasn't claiming victory the way in which Donald Trump was. He was simply saying that let's just be patient. Let's get all the votes be counted.
All right, I've just been told that we have to go to Detroit, Michigan, where we have vote counting ongoing, and we'll just take a dip into it, and then we'll be back.
The vote count, as I've said many times, is never done on the day of election night, the counties are doing this accurately and then accurately as quickly as they possibly can. And again, I'll also just remind everyone, military and overseas ballots are not due until a week after Election Day. So next Tuesday is the deadline for military and overseas voters to cast their ballots. And we want to make sure that not only every civilian absentee and mail-in valid voter is counted, but also that every man and woman who are serving our country, that their votes are counted. So thank you, and we are happy to take questions. Should I stay?
Sure. I'm sure you want to talk to Kathy. Any questions? Dennis?
Can you tell us where we stand right now and what you know of challenges, legal challenges from the Trump administration, and how are you preparing to deal with those?
Okay.
So I think, basically what you know that's been publicly reported, that's really all we have at this point. So, and I can't talk about active litigation, unfortunately. So, you could, but as things are filed, of course, those will be publicly accessible.
Do you have attorneys that are going to handle that, or are you bringing in
All
somebody
right,
from the outside?
votes are still being counted there in Detroit, Michigan. And Biden is so positive about when in Michigan. Talk to me about that, Carl.
Well, again, you hear her explaining what I was just referring to. Every state has their own rules and procedures. There's no mystery to this. This happens every year, except it's amplified by the scale of the votes, of the mail-in votes, that was caused by the pandemic crisis situation, where you had expanded early voting, expanded mail-in voting. That's why you have what you have today with Michigan. So she's talking about that. And if you're talking about, the uncertainty surrounding Michigan, it's because even though it's 90% that's been reported so far, but Biden's only up by 0.2%. However, that's not counting the big population centers like Detroit. More than 500,000 votes remain to be counted, coming from the population centers, which are heavily, heavily Democrat. And
okay, talk to us about North Carolina, because we have 95%. Just briefly, how do you think the votes will end over there?
Well, North Carolina seems to be leaning towards Donald Trump. First of all, it was never expected to be a toss-up state, except but until you had even, I believe, Barack Obama visiting North Carolina and Joe Biden visiting North Carolina, they thought that they could pull this red state, this Republican state, into the Democrat column.
All right, I've been told we have to go on break right now. Carl Bostic, thanks a lot for providing those insight into what's going on right now in the U.S. You're watching the Arise special, and we are taking a look at the U.S. elections. Plenty more still ahead, including the effect of the U.S. presidential election on foreign policy, especially in Africa. We have analysis.
Paid postage in Pennsylvania is we went to the counties where they are. So if they wanted it to be through their business reply mail, USPS permit, we did it that way. If they wanted to literally have us reimburse them for stamps or metered postage, we did it however they want. So some of them are not even, and I don't remember how many, but we could get you that information, how many counties are using business reply mail. But those are still postmarked. They have timing marks, they are date stamped, they are still trackable by date. So it's a tiny fraction of any of those things, whether it's business reply mail or regular mail. I mean, we've all had that situation where you get a letter and it's not postmarked. It's rare, right? Same for business reply mail. They do what's called a timing mark, so that's just, it's not accurate. They're all stamped.
No mark on it. If it is one of those rare occasions, would it be counted?
So under the current Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision, which is currently the law, yes, as long as there's no affirmative evidence that it was postmarked after November 3rd, as long as it's received by November 6th at 5 p.m., it will be counted. Yes.
It's my understanding that the state's website is showing 18 counties with 0% mail-in ballots counted. Is that accurate? Do you have any insight into that?
So, what I would suggest, sometimes counties are uploading on their own websites and haven't transmitted the file to the Department of State because, they have their own local races. So I urge you, if you see any, and this is what we're going to be doing throughout the day, go to the county website. You should always do that. It's a great way to double check. But we're going to be following up with all those counties to say, hey, make sure you get us the files. Some of them, this year, because for the first time, we had a website that was going to itemize the mail-in ballots from the in-person ballots from the provisionals. Some of the counties, when they uploaded the results, it merged the two types into one, and that was just, they formatted it wrong. So we're working through that to make sure that the actual attribution of those ballots are right.
Notice that there's a larger than expected number of counties that have reported.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that they haven't counted. It may just mean that it's just not uploaded to the Department of State website yet. So I do urge you to check the county websites and see if that's available on their website.
Last thing, I'm sorry, if I could just double back on something. If I heard you correctly in your introductory remarks, it was between 2.5 and 3 million mail-in ballots. Is that, and you're roughly 50%? If you could speak with as much specificity as possible regarding that would be helpful.
Well, I think, the numbers that I gave yesterday, it was just under 2.6 million, as I recall. But again, I'm not sure what has additionally come in. But so as of yesterday, at some point, it was just under 2.6 million that had been cast. And that's when I think I said it was 83% or something like that. So we can get back to you. Again, go on the website. You'll have that information available to you. I just don't have it at my fingertips today.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell us how many mail-in ballots are outstanding on a county-by-county breakdown, or is that also on the website?
It's on the website. Yep. So if you go to the regular ENR reporting website, it also tells you that you can click on the supplemental dashboard. And you click on that, it breaks down. There's a tab for mail ballots that breaks it down by county, how many have been cast, how many have been counted, and how many are remaining. There's a tab for in-person precincts reporting, broken down by county, so it'll tell you how many precincts are in each county, how many are fully reported. There's a tab for provisional ballots, but you won't see those numbers yet.
Kathy, I think we have a question.
Okay. Okay, thank you. No?
Oh, you didn't.
Oh.
I want to cite Lancaster County because what they're saying is that if they count anything that you're authorizing them to segregate, they won't be able to go back if there's some ruling and remove those counts. What's your response to that?
It's not accurate. And again, we sent an email to the counties yesterday. We spoke, I think I said this yesterday, we spoke to all of the voting system vendors. It is absolutely feasible, not even challenging. I mean, there are different ways to do it. You can use different machines, you can use different memory sticks, you can absolutely segregate them. That's not going to be a problem. So we reached out we sent this email to the counties, giving them instructions, advising them to talk directly to their voting system vendors.
What does the state do if they don't comply, if they don't count?
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. I expect them all to comply. All right? Thank you.
Back to the Arise special. I'm sorry, we'll just have to apologize for that. It's not Detroit, Michigan, it's actually Pennsylvania. So it's in Pennsylvania that we're having these updates. The outcome of the U.S. presidential election stands to drastically affect U.S. foreign policy towards developing nations in Africa, particularly due to Donald Trump and Joe Biden's differing approaches to solving one of the world's most pressing issues. For more insight, we turn to Arise News analyst Dr. Sam Amadi, who lived in the United States and has been monitoring the U.S. election. Good to have you, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
What's your view on all that's happening? We are seeing a situation where Donald Trump is sounding like the typical African incumbent president, saying that his votes are about to be stolen, and a lot is happening and all of that. How do you think this impacts on the viewers from outside of the U.S. and the way they are looking at this election?
I think first, this is regrettable. And of course, Americans, nobody thought would come to a day like this. I was in the U.S. in 2000 as a graduate student when Bush and Gore took place. And as we watched, we bated breath, and of course, CNN had already called Florida for Al Gore, and then called it back for Bush, and then stalemated until Secretary Katrin Harris came with the child ballots and all that. Okay, we never expected we were going to get to where a president of the U.S. would first allege fraud, and then go to the point of going to announce himself because he anticipates that he's about to be rigged out of power, and then probably to go to the Supreme Court. So we're heading there again. Now, for Africans and people in the developing country, this has a very adverse effect in the sense that part of the rhetoric for democratization has been always pointing to best practice, quote unquote, in the U.S. So the assumption is that the U.S. and Western democracies provide for us a template. As a matter of
yeah, I mean, you have the Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, that has been, and the U.S. always setting the templates for election, what should be done and not. And with all of this happening, I mean, it's interesting.
So it's difficult to now tell the African despot or the authoritarian ruler in Africa, or the African Democrat who is becoming hesitant, kind of half-hearted about democratization. It's difficult to tell him, look, what example are they going to offer? So if gold rust, what will iron do? So
and it brings me to the issue of what's happening in Tanzania right now, and then Ivory Coast,
absolutely,
where the elections are disputed, and then a lot of hot air being blown around.
The leaders saber-rattling, they are going to use force. So this is a bad example for democracy. In fact, as a matter of fact, it shows also the decline of American power. The soft power, which in foreign policy debate, we talk about soft power and hard power. Obviously, America's military strength is overwhelming. Put together EU and China in terms of hard military power. The US still a one-liner. US is a unipolar. US is an outliner. It's so powerful way of economy. US is shrinking. The Chinese are catching up. The European Union under
and it's democratic rights right
but
now.
Now the soft power, which is the attraction, the US attraction to everybody, by virtue of its institution, how they work, is now ebbing. It's come to a very low point. So essentially, this might be a dark time for the U.S.
Okay, I've been told we don't have enough time. Very quickly before we go, what do you foresee if Donald Trump actually announces himself winner and all of that, and refuses to accept, defeat?
I think if the Supreme Court pronounced, he has no option. I think he's hoping on the Supreme Court to validate his announcement. But again, this, I think, somewhat, it won't be a case of a South African with some military around himself. Like they say, if Donald Trump loses clearly and the court confirms that loss, if it doesn't go, then we expect that American soldiers or Marines.
So it's America's democratic credentials being eroded very quickly.
Absolutely,
in 30 seconds.
Yes, it's eroded, but they can rebuild depending on what happens this election. If Donald Trump win, as he may likely win, then we can see a reinforcement of American, extraordinary behavior that does not reinforce the notion of liberal institutionalism.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Sam, for that wonderful analysis. Well, we want to thank all our analysts that we've had today, starting from Greg Swenson earlier on, and then John Lindsay, and then Carl Bostic, eventually ending up with Dr. Sam Amadi here, Rise News analyst. And we want to say we've had a very fantastic engagement here, and we hope to have a lot of this engagement on Arise News as the hours go by. Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here on this special edition, goodbye and thank you for watching.